Hey everybody. So happy Black History Month. We have Beyonce coming out with her Renaissance tour dates and the rest of us sitting here like, can we get one? Can we get one? Is it how much is it gonna cost? And at the same time we have Tyre Nichols funeral going on today. And that encompasses kind of the extremes of joy and happiness, I think. And then tragedy in the Black community and in the spectrum of Black history. Um, so I've been thinking for a long time whether to express these thoughts, and I have written these out at one point in like a Facebook post or whatever, years ago. Because I'm not even on Facebook. I've been off Facebook for years, but about HBCUs, and I honestly, I'm not even talking about the Deion Sanders stuff. Anybody who thinks Deion Sanders did, I think, wonders to draw attention to Jackson State. I'm not mad at him, and if you are, you don't know anything about Deion Sanders. Okay, in terms of who he is and what he goes after in terms of his own ambitions, and that's his business. But anyway, not long ago, I remember saying I just would not entertain the conversation of whether historically Black colleges and universities were still relevant. Primarily because I believe the conversation was way too one-sided. Because nobody asked whether, historically white colleges and universities are still relevant when they have been around far longer and guilty of many discriminatory practices. That's why they are predominantly white institutions, not predominantly non-Black institutions. Okay? They keep a lot of people out. And they've been guilty of many discriminatory practices even today as the media tries to perpetuate, these illusions of people who they make it to look at that Black person that got into Harvard. Or this, that, and the other, or they have more Black people at Harvard. Yeah, the damage they do to those Black people in the process, however, needs to be questioned. So, Alexa, off. Sorry, I had a time for something else. As a matter of fact, if it hadn't been for white colleges and universities' discriminatory practices, HBCUs would have never been necessary. So then to come back and ask Black people basically why their institutions are necessary is some bullshit. How dare you gaslight us like that? And I think I'm motivated to speak on this because of my past experiences in graduate school, my experiences as an independent school teacher, particularly in New York. I have endured, real utter disrespect in regards to my Black college education. And I know that there seems to be a resurgence of interest and good around HBCUs, but I want to leave this here, in terms of just my experience. And I graduated from the one and only Spelman College. And yes, it's the number one HBCU. And yes, I think it deserves to be there. I don't want to hear nobody talking about how bougie the Black women are who go to Spelman, this, that, and the other. Okay. Hey, we all know we have our HBCU battles and that kind of thing, but I'm making a larger point. Now, while I graduated from Spelman, I can vouch for other HBCUs like Howard, like Fisk, like Morehouse, etc. I can go on and on. And I can say that an HBCU arms you with the educational and personal confidence that an African American must have for survival in America. Like, and I mean that like for real, for real. Like the question often posed by many white and also just non-Black people, because I had this experience with Asians and particularly white Latinos, is why do you want to be separated? And to be sure, Black people never asked to be separated. African Americans wanted equal opportunities for education, and to avoid granting African Americans the equality they desired and deserved as American citizens, they kept us out of their schools. Okay? And as W.B. Du Bois pointed out over a century ago, and yes, it is Du Bois, not Du Bois. He's from Great Barrington, Massachusetts, okay? Not France. Anyway, the North, which helped perpetuate racism as well. I don't know why that myth is so prominent, but anyway, allowed the South to continue to segregate because they didn't want to deal with the race problem. And they wanted to invest in Southern enterprises, which took basically the damn near free labor of Black people after slavery, so on and so forth. In short, we were separated by American whites, and for them to turn around and ask us, why do we want to be separated? Like I said, it's absurd. And I think people need to question why my African American high school classmate had a minority move-in day, as opposed to giving all freshman students non-offensive options to move in at UNC Chapel Hill. This was in 2006. That's what year I went into college. Or better yet, why should black students even want to attend places like San Jose State University, where a black student was taunted with racial slurs and had a bicycle lock clamped around his neck? Or maybe they should question the black honor student, Keisha Reeves, who was at Ole Miss, who unexpectedly endured racial and verbal attacks one night. One included being called a black nigger from the back of somebody's pickup truck. Okay? So it amazes me that even with the evidence of so much hostility toward African Americans in these majority white university environments, that white people and many African Americans attack the preservation of historically black colleges. And I find it even more troubling that many of the same people who are against the preservation of HBCUs are also against affirmative action policies to ensure that African Americans and other minority groups receive an equal opportunity for higher education. This tells me that those people do not want African Americans to have access to education, particularly higher education, at all. And I got a problem with that. Okay. Anyway, so HBCUs have had, and this is important to understand, they have an incredibly daunting task and have had such a task for well over a century. Their burden often includes picking up the slack for a public school system that has often failed African American students. They often give opportunities to black students who otherwise may not be able to afford an education somewhere else. For example, HBCUs will bend over backward, and I know everybody gonna have a different story, and that's fine. You could drop down in the comments, trying to find resources to help black students whose parents don't have the income nor credit to co-sign on a student loan to stay in school, whereas they might be sent home without another thought at a majority school. You know, I'm well aware of the stereotypes that HBCUs are lackluster in all departments and full of lazy people who have no investment in the students and get paid for doing very little work, especially in departments like financial aid. Now, is that true in some place? Absolutely. But was that true at UCLA, where I went for graduate school? Absolutely. So my point is, the kind of things that people seem to use as examples are these sort of pathologized elements of blackness, as if they don't exist at colleges and universities all across this country. Yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but it's not because black people they are fundamentally failing at other things. So over the course of my time as a PhD candidate at UCLA, it took me 5 years to get my PhD, I often spoke because my experience at UCLA was so treacherous. That's why I worked so hard to get the fuck out of there. Because the average person at that time finished in 8 years and I finished in 5. That's how miserable I was, okay? I would often go back because I went straight from college to graduate school without a break, okay? And I also spoke about my wonderful experience at Spelman, and I was asked, but would you send your kid to Spelman or an HBCU if they had the choice of going to an Ivy League? And this was also a question I got. That was one question. And then I got a question from a white Latino, and he said to me, well, I mean, yeah, but would you send your kids there? I mean, like, if they had the choice of going somewhere else. Right? Now, this is somebody who went to, I don't know what like, somewhere in Florida, some university I had never, ever fucking heard of. Okay? But he was going to come for me. And while I said I would never make that particular decision for my children because my parents didn't make it for me, I would certainly explain to them the incredible benefits of attending such an institution. The way my father did for me when he talked about Morehouse, long before I was even considering exactly what college I would attend or even really understood the concept of college. So I couldn't help but to believe when these people would ask me this, the undertone was that somehow my education was not as good as somebody else's at an Ivy League. Never mind, I was in a graduate program that I'm sure many students from Ivy Leagues applied to. There were a couple there and were not admitted into. There were some who were admitted, but some who were not. Moreover, every predominantly white institution is not an Ivy League nor a great school because it is majority white or simply majority non-black. So miss me with the bullshit. And after all, people that graduate from Harvard send their kids to Harvard. People that graduate from Yale send their kids to Yale. So, I mean, why should black people feel inadequate to send their kids back to Spelman or Howard or Fisk or wherever to preserve the institutions that embody their traditions and beliefs? So I'm not here for that, looking for validation from white people. I'm fucking not. And I also decided to address this issue in this video, and people can take it, share it, hate it, I don't care. Formerly, because of the discrimination I faced as a graduate of an HBCU while working on my PhD at UCLA. And not just by white people, because there was plenty of them. The sort of discrimination I'm referring to right now is once again not limited to non-black students and professors. Of course, I heard multiple times from black professors, just little snide remarks. I remember one professor, he said to me, "Oh, that's why I didn't go to an HBCU." Like real snide, and it was like out of like this weird sort, you know how something comes out of nowhere, but you're like, you've been sitting on that for a minute. It doesn't make sense, but the way you said that, this has been on your mind. Yeah, okay. So I found those statements interesting and nerve-wracking, disappointing, and incredibly awkward, seeing that the statement in every case was never solicited. I never asked. Like, what? Never once did I ask a black professor why they did not attend an HBCU. And it might be something like, I came into the office with a Spelman t-shirt on, or just something like that. And I found over and over again that these unsolicited statements reveal their personal jealousy, resentment, and or ignorance of African Americans who attend HBCUs. Now, often these people who make these kind of statements are people who went to majority white schools because they believe that anything majority white would result into their entry into elitism and quote unquote better opportunities, but only to find out they were treated as outsiders and left college without many friends or connections or people who valued their presence at the institution, and consequently resent HBCU graduates who had the opposite experience. Also, many of them who study the black experience, like in books, right, fear that people will question them on why they always talk about black stuff, but have stayed in these larger white elite environments and never tried to teach in more diverse places. Now, granted, when people pose that question, it does have racist implications, right? Well, why don't you go teach that black stuff to black people, blah, 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 right? And that's the point to be made. But there's also a case to say, hey, this is where I got a job, this is where I work. But that fear is not the reality, right? The fear of such a question results in this constant defensive approach, even before such a question is ever asked. So allow me to explain. For example, I remember my second year in graduate school, and I was walking into my black professor's office, once again, wearing a Spelman College t-shirt. Like, not something I walked in, I just happened to be talking about it. Like, you just put something on and go. So I never once initiated a conversation on HBCUs. Why? Because I was in there to get help with my work or whatever the fuck it was. And I certainly, didn't want to have one with those people. So anyway, I had a quick question. I remember I had a quick question. Then I wanted to meet my friends for lunch. Okay, the few I had. And the professor said to me, "Oh, I didn't know you went to Spelman." And to this I replied, "Yeah, I did." Because I really just wanted to ask this question. I remember being hungry. I remember. And then I proceeded to get my notebook out of my bag, where I had written the one question I needed answered. He then responded to, I guess he responded to himself, but he was still talking to me because he goes, "Well, I just came back from my nephew's graduation at Xavier." I was completely, disinterested, but I had been raised to pretend to be interested in uninteresting things presented by my superiors at work or school. So I quickly fell into the role. I said, "Oh, that's nice." I didn't care, but okay. Yeah, that graduation was something else. Once again, he's responding to himself because clearly I have not invited this in the conversation. Considering the tradition of historically black college graduations, I said, "Oh, was it longer than you expected?" His response was, "Well, not as long as it could be. It reminded me of the reason why I didn't go to an HBCU." At this point, and this was only my second year in graduate school, I already knew the bullshit. I already knew he wanted me to ask so he could insult me and offend me. No, what you mad at is that white professor that probably just walked down the hall and probably damn near called you a nigga being so disrespectful. And now you're looking for somebody to take it out on. And black people without protection in those kind of spaces can be easy prey. And for some reason, he decided to pick me. Because I was one of the few black people in there. And I just remember thinking, excuse me? I'm sorry, I'm not clear as to how sitting through your nephew's one college graduation at one single HBCU is now an indicator of all HBCUs, their legacy, and their academic integrity to make such a statement. Moreover, this professor did not attend an Ivy League or a top college for undergrad. So I was not clear then, nor am I clear now, on why this school he attended was better than attending Xavier University, which was conveniently and ignorantly lumped into one school, an HBCU. Now, there are two interesting points to be made here. One, this professor, who was and is still discussing African American topics in history, writing books on black people, their agency, the kind of things that black people have done in the 20th century around political and social movements. That was his thing. That's what he's known across the country for. And had clearly internalized white racist presumptions by dismissing African American diversity and suggesting that we, in the case of HBCUs, the we, are no different from one another simply because they educate black students. So, patriot much? And then point two, the reason why it was interesting to me, this is someone who declared to a majority white audience in an academic talk. And I remember this because I remember being internally embarrassed. That he decided to write his new book on a white person, quote, because I just didn't want to write on another black person. I just didn't. End quote. Why the fuck would you say that? Like, you know what I mean? Like, why the fuck would you say that? Other than to prove to white people, oh, I can do something other than study my people as if black people are unworthy. Jewish people don't study Jewish people all the time? Or a lot of the time? White people study white people all the time. And they write the same book over and over again. So miss me. All right? And once again, his declaration, even in that talk, was unsolicited. Just like his HBCU statement. And his statement reeked of black self-hatred and a need for white acceptance. And I really believe that he studied black people at majority white institutions in deep hope that white people would accept him and who he was as a black person to validate his existence. Good luck with that, because the only person that can do that is God, and he was an atheist. Anyway, additionally, if this professor had actually attended an HBCU, he would have most likely been freed from this desire to have his academic work on black people approved by white people in this way. I understand we live in a white supremacist society, and I'm not discounting that. But he did not attend one, which is probably why this individual is still wandering in the wilderness, so to speak. Okay? I want to recall another incident with this same professor. There are multiple experiences with professors, but I'm just going down a few because I want to make this point about the necessity of HBCUs. So as a graduate teaching assistant, I worked under him. Like I said, his office, I had worked under him for research and, other things. And also because I taught under him, that was part of my training. So I had a young African-American female student, which was rare at UCLA. I wasn't in African-American studies. I was in the history department. And so when I finally got like a black female student, you know, was somebody excited? And she came to my office one afternoon and she was in tears. And I could tell she had been crying, and I had said to her, I said, are you okay? And it just happened to be me and her in the office. And she was having a very difficult time matriculating at UCLA. Not because she wasn't smart enough. I mean, because I was thinking to myself, why did she think, what did she do in another class? Because she was doing great in mine. I was just happy that she stopped by. But, I wasn't, she was, I didn't anticipate she was coming by because she was concerned about her grades or anything. But because of the ostracization and belittlement of black students like herself had become really just too much to bear. And honestly, as a graduate student, I knew that feeling all too well. So I was capable of offering her support, but it hurt me to see that, especially at that age where I was learning to believe in myself and thrive for no other reason than I ended up going to Spelman because I happened to get some scholarship money. And I'm talking about like, yeah, I got a partial scholarship to Spelman, and I got like the Georgia Hope. Like I had several things to help pay, but they were just, whatever. I'm getting off. Anyway, she was so impressed that I had graduated from Spelman, and she was just talking to me, and I could just tell something was wrong. You know, you just let somebody kind of talk because you just want to make sure they don't walk away and then something happen, right? So I'm going to talk, and during the conversation, and she told me, she was like, oh my gosh, can't believe you graduated from Spelman. So I'm just, listening but talking, not. During the conversation, she explained to me that she had been waitlisted at Spelman as a high school senior. And she's telling me that her Asian high school counselor discouraged her from waiting to hear back and told her Spelman was not as good of a school as UCLA and that she honestly doesn't need to go to a black school anyway. If I had 2 pennies for every time a black person told me that, including the ones that went to HBCUs, I would not have to work another day in my life. And I am not exaggerating. Yeah, okay, that shit. And I, of course, challenged this notion mildly, but for fear her regret would grow more intense. I didn't want to go, no, it's the best place in the world. And then, make her feel worse or anything, and and cause her more personal strife, because I could tell this young lady was in a bad place. So we talked for over an hour, and by the time she left, I could tell she was in better spirits. Not necessarily good ones, but better ones, right? And I encouraged her to go and talk to the same black professor, the one that I've been shitting on. I encouraged her to go talk to him because I knew it was important that at a school with fucking 40,000 people and you're an undergrad and you're black in a place that is so anti-black, it was fucking believable. The students had to make a conscious effort to get to know their professors and network, because I remember thinking, gosh, when students would come up and ask me for a recommendation, I would always write it, but I didn't have a PhD yet. And I was like, damn, it must be really hard. I remember a friend of mine said, it must be really hard to get a recommendation here. And she had gone to Clark, Atlanta. Anyway, so I said, well, you want to introduce yourselves to professors and try to network. A skill, by the way, I had been taught during my freshman year at the historically black Spelman College, okay? A skill that she would not have known to acquire had it not been for her historically black educated teaching assistant. Okay, but I digress. And after all, he attended a majority white public college as an undergrad and could perhaps offer more personal and hopefully helpful advice. I think this was a good opportunity for her, right? I had my own personal insights, but that was different. So she took my advice, and she eventually went to him, came back to me a few days later, and like the next week or so, to talk to me for another hour. And I let her sit and talk. I was happy. Let me tell you something. I was happy to see another young black girl. Just anybody, please, somebody black talk to me. So let me find somebody. Because I knew what it was to be ostracized in an academic environment and perpetually frustrated by not having anybody that understood what was happening or gaslighting you. Are you sure about that? Do you think they meant it like that? Fuck them. Of course they meant it like that. Anyway, so she eventually told me that she went to visit the professor, like I suggested. In the course of the conversation that she had with him, she told him how much she liked having me as a TA, a teaching assistant, and went on to tell him about what we had discussed about my college experience. No big thing. Yeah, I told you because I told you. So he asked her, why do you keep talking to Salah about Spelman? Yes, he did. Are you thinking about transferring? And she told me, she said, I said no. And I knew she was telling the truth because I had asked her a similar question because she was so unhappy. And she had given me the same exact answer. I think her financial aid and everything, she just needed to stay there. And I totally understood that. His response to her was good. Don't. That's what he said to her. And that's exactly how she told me that story. And I remember saying, once again, like I said, this girl was in a bad place. So it wasn't, but I know as soon as I got out of that conversation with her, I got on that fucking phone and I The first person that will listen. So excuse me, this coming from someone who never taught at Spelman or any other HBCU and who never attended an HBCU as a student. Okay, sir. Once again, he demonstrated his ignorance and whitewashed approach to education. It was more important to him that she stay suffocated and suffering at an all-white institution than to go to a black institution where she would be supported and her claims of racism would not be rendered as events that were, quote, just in her head or dismissed as hypersensitivity. This is someone who claimed they made a sacrifice. This is the professor, made a sacrifice by teaching at UCLA, one of the most elitist institutions in this country, but simply because it was public. Miss me with the motherfucking bullshit. Now, he could sacrifice for white and non-black students to educate them because that was a sacrifice that so many of his so-called liberal white colleagues would appreciate. And that was what was important to him. Not making the sacrifice to educate the very people you have made a career off writing about. Right. Okay? That is what I like to call fake activism. Give me a motherfucking break. These statements resulted in my indignation, not simply because I did not like what this individual said, but because I knew this person would have never done that to undermine a white girl who graduated from Wellesley, an all-women's college, or a Catholic who had graduated from Notre Dame, or a Jew who had graduated from Brandeis, but he felt comfortable disrespecting a black woman who graduated from Spelman. Because there are little to no consequences for belittling black students or harming them in the workplace, as they are students at the same time and then working in a PhD program. So much so that black professors can use you as a whipping board as they please, even though they should know better and are capable of doing better. And these black professors that I encountered at my time at UCLA were often the same ones who willingly took on white students without any strife or investigation of their academic credentials. One of my graduate colleagues who studied Africa had no problem during the year she was acquiring her master's in New York or her PhD in LA, finding well-established black professors as mentors. This is the same individual who, when somebody asked if there was a bathroom, responded, this is the same white girl like I'm talking about. When somebody asked if there a bathroom, she responded, of course, this is in Africa. But she can find black mentors to tutor her in African history and to mentor her through a PhD and a master's. Quit playing with me. I just can't with this fuck shit. So anyway, it always amazes me that people think somehow by choosing an HBCU that you must not have been admitted into a, quote, better school. They are often unaware of how many of us were accepted into Harvard, Georgetown, Yale, University of Michigan, Princeton, and still chose to attend an HBCU. The idea that my education was somehow, quote, less than or inferior is ludicrous and ill-informed at best. People are often unaware that Harvard, Yale, Princeton, UC Berkeley, University of Michigan, and others had no problem accepting many HBCU graduates a second time around when we prepared to go directly, not with years of directly into law, into getting our PhDs, into getting our masters, into medical school. Okay? So, and furthermore, many of us that are now attending or graduated now from those top schools, can certainly attest that there were many people who attended, say, a Columbia University for undergrad, whether they were black, white, or otherwise, that were not accepted into the same graduate programs that many of us graduated from and ranked high. So, oftentimes when I've run into some African Americans who did not attend HBCUs for undergrad, and while they may not, have been in, whatever, many of them often, when I was in graduate school, would do African American studies or Africana studies. A lot of those black people had not gone to HBCUs, and many of them enter those sort of graduate programs for different reasons than HBCU grads enter them. Many of them are actually searching for an experience and an opportunity that they did not have in undergrad, which they thought somehow they were going to get on these majority white campuses or these majority non-black campuses. HBCU graduates receive this sort of training, whether they major in economics, history, mathematics, biology, or psychology, because HBCUs manage to incorporate these sort of topics into every major. And I'm speaking broadly, but I know I can say that for Spelman. And in the process, instill the greatest confidence and pride that only one can imagine in each student, even the ones that did not think they would ever feel that way. Like I've said before, I was not on this black feminist bullshit, and that's the way I looked at it all through undergrad. It was when I got out there at UCLA and was out there, I was lonely as fuck. I was black. I stood out everywhere. I don't give a damn what y'all see with Hollywood and the black stars y'all see in Hollywood. LA is a white fucking place. Okay? And they have managed to relegate black people to a very small place. And the black people who live in the upper echelons like Baldwin Hills versus those who have had to move out of the city are very different. Okay? So generally, HBCU graduates anyway that enter into African American studies programs tend to do it more to continue to develop that passion that was instilled in them. Perhaps from youth, but a lot of times really, it was instilled in them at these historically black institutions that other people thought they were too good to go to. So, I just want to make the point and make sure I'm just making this broader point for a second time. Don't allow people to try to make you feel insecure or less than because of your degree from an HBCU. If you're somebody looking into an HBCU, and I know that things happen with financial aid, I know that everything is not going to always show up that way, but the mentality behind, if it's black, it must be wrong, that is who I'm talking to. Okay? If that is what people have to tell themselves to make them feel better about their insecurities because they have to compete with a black person that graduated from an HBCU in an environment that they believe you don't deserve to be in because your education was supposed to be so inferior, then so be it. Let them have it. We're here for a reason. And if HBCUs were so useless, they would not waste their time on news segments or in professors' offices trying to convince us why they are unnecessary. They've seen too many powerful and conscious African Americans come out of these institutions not to be nervous. W.E.B. Du Bois, Martin Luther King Jr., Thurgood Marshall, David Satcher, and look these people up, Marion Wright Edelman, John Hope Franklin, Ruth J. Simmons, Ronald McNair, Langston Hughes, Toni Morrison, Nikki Giovanni, like Regina Benjamin, the list goes on and on. So stay strong and committed. And yes, I'm here for HBCUs, and that's just what it is. And then some other time, maybe I'll talk more intimately about my experience in college. But I just wanted to drop that here. Happy Black History Month, y'all.